Hi, I'm historian and psychotherapist Andy Erdman, and this is Feel Familiar? Emotionally Intelligent History, a show where we look at important, but sometimes little known or forgotten events and people from the past in order to better understand the present day. We'll also see how feelings, thoughts, fantasies, and ideas drive people to make history.
There's more to history than what you've been taught. History repeats, it may or may not. Time's got baggage, we all do. Erdman's here to walk us through what, when, where, how, who. Feel familiar? Crack the spine, a time's old script. We're diving in where the facts have slipped. It's history told with wit and care, with ghosts and guests, no thoughts to spare. Who, what, why, how, where. Feel familiar?
Welcome back to Feel Familiar, Emotionally Intelligent History. We've been talking about a very important event from American history, although it's little known today, but it does have a great deal of resonance. We're talking about the Astor Place Opera House riot of 1849, in which soldiers opened fire on a crowd, killing at least 23 people and injuring many more. And we have two clashing interest groups. Those who support the American-born actor Edwin Ned Forrest, they call themselves natives, even though they're not, and they're known as the Bowery B'hoys. And then on the other side, you have New York's wealthy elite, and they support a British actor named William Charles Macready. And this group is known as the Upper Ten, sometimes the codfish aristocracy. They're wealthy and they're very terrified of immigrants, of populism, and of threats to their own power and property. And I posed a couple of questions. One is, what if these two political factions, the populist, white-identified, very male-identified working classes, were ever to join forces with the billionaire classes, in effect, and take control of structural power in the country? And furthermore, I also asked, what if political rifts can in part be traced to a fundamental anxiety, a kind of betrayal trauma over acknowledging and witnessing a separate mind? Okay, we're going to look now at William Macready and Ned Forrest to get to know these personalities a little bit better so we can understand what led to the Astor Place Opera House riot of 1849. But I really thought, as I was looking at all of this, and I'd be curious, if this resonates, what if you have these two groups that are so opposed? You have this nativist, white-identified, kind of teenage male group. And then on the other hand, you have this kind of billionaire class that's afraid of the loss of the social order. They're at odds now, at least seemingly. What if they eventually align? And I think that's a lot of what we're seeing today. You have structural power and this kind of young, male, adolescent, wounded, raw emotion come together.
If I may, also reminds me of, from the documentary I became obsessed with during the Panny, The Rise of the Nazis. It talks a lot about how before democracy fell in Germany, like those that had power but wanted to kind of pull in the masses, quote unquote, thought like, hey, there's this Hitler guy. The common man seems to like him. What if we just manipulated him and make him think that we like him and use him for our purposes?
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, you have no idea who you're dealing with. It's like an interesting sort of parallel to what you're talking about of like, oh, dear God, what if that raw energy and those resources were to meet and be like, wait, we're not at odds. It's terrifying.
Totally. What if what if you can give us the right punching bag and give us the guy to throw the punches? Yeah, totally. I think that's terrifying, horrifying, and truthful, observation. So let's talk about our two main players or figureheads here, William Macready and Ned Forrest. William Charles Macready, there's some dispute about this, but according to something written while he was still alive, he was born in Cork, Ireland in 1793, interestingly. His father owned a theater in Birmingham, and Macready was like, I am not going into the family business. I am not going into the family business.
I'm in the family business.
I'm in the family business. I described him in my little script here as a Jane Austen era Michael Corleone. I try to remove myself, but they do persuade me back.
P.S. I would pay a lot of dollars to see a Jane Austen sort of Godfather mashup.
Do you have anything more in mind that, or that was just kind of...
Tell him hitherto and henceforth, if he doth persist in his endeavors, I shall whack him.
You know how it is with our mercantile concerns. So anyway, Macready is a naturally talented actor. By 1816, he is having a lot of success playing in London. And there's a couple of things that differentiate Macready from some of the other actors at the time. First of all, he's interested in historical fidelity. So, in other words, if he's playing like in a play that's set in Rome, he wants it to look like Rome and not like England in 1816. This is kind of a new idea. He's also kind of a more nuanced or subtle actor. This is also a new thing, right? What we think of as kind of naturalistic, Mary, you've had training in like, I guess, Stanislavski, or I don't know what sort of trainings you've had. And he invents something called the Macready pause, which is he pauses.
It's only because he's forgetting his lines.
Probably. It's amazing. Actors at the time, they had memorized hundreds of plays. So if someone said, we're doing Richard II tomorrow night, like, oh, yeah, I got it. And he's also said to be one of the kind of inventors of the profession of directing, as we think of it, because directors didn't really exist.
Can I interject here?
You can, please.
I know, again, from this class I took
Mel Gordon class?
at NYU Theater School.
Yeah.
The Mel Gordon class in particular, but even beyond that, I remember a lot of still photographs of these very sort of exaggerated, almost like kabuki-like poses. And I hope I'm not misremembering, but is this a point where it went from that sort of more stylized, like almost like dance positions of like, this means horror, but this means sadness. Like they literally almost like buttons on a machine.
Totally.
It'd be like, no, that's the wrong gesture. You're not sad. No, sad is this. Like sign language. And then it kind of got more naturalistic. Is that what you're talking about with Macready and like Bernhardt? And
definitely, yeah. And it's complicated and it takes place over many decades. And this is all based on what an audience considers to be realistic or compelling, Sad to them, if they're watching an actor, means declaring the lines in a certain way and holding up their hand in a certain way. And clearly Macready is onto something else. Like, I don't know that we need to do that all the time. Now, interesting, the big motherfucking star of the day is a British actor named Edwin Keane. And he's very emotional and explosive, but I think also very compelling. Like, both Macready and Forrest really like Edwin Keane. Kind of everyone has to like him. He's huge. He dies in 1833. And at that point, Macready he's the top British actor.
So he like inherits the throne, so to speak.
Exactly. He inherits the acting throne in Britain. And he is called by the nickname the Eminent Tragedian, which in 1833 is a pretty cool nickname. So Macready does what a lot of British and European actors are doing at the time. He decides to cross the Atlantic and make a tour of the U.S., and he makes a tour in 1826 and another one in 1843-44. And for what it's worth, he actually liked America. He said, the United States, quote, has been endeared to my recollection by long and strong attachments. Ned Forrest, by comparison, was born in 1806 in Philadelphia. Hon.
Oh, hon.
To a poorer middle-class family. So he's from...
They weren't poor. That's a bunch of nonsense. They had plenty of money.
I don't know. I saw them at an Eagles game, and you tell me...
They got so much Eagles merch, man. That's a load of malarkey.
You're just saying that because they prefer Pats to Geno's, okay? And everybody knows that Jim's is the best.
Great Scrapple.
Oh, God, Scrapple. Oh. So, Forrest he's influenced also by Edwin Keane. He worked with Edwin Keane in Albany in 1825. So, as I said, the kind of frontier of theatrical respectability and business respectability is creeping northward in the 1820s. And it goes from Lower Manhattan on the Bowery to Astor Place, then to Union Square, then up the Flatiron District, for those familiar with New York, past where kind of Madison Square Park is. And eventually it reaches what we call the Broadway District today. That's not till the 1890s. And in the 1890s is when Hammerstein's Olympia opens on the corner of 44th and Broadway. We're talking about Oscar Hammerstein the first. And the Hammerstein's Olympia, imagine a kind of combination of like a Vegas casino, a theater, Disney World, I don't know, like a food court and like a gastropub and like a brewery, like all shoved into one. It is called the grandest amusement temple in the world. And, okay. And then in 1904, the subway line eventually reaches Times Square. At the time, it was called Longacre Square. But at the time, we're talking about Astor Place is the cutting edge. Edwin Forrest makes a huge hit playing Othello in 1826 at the Bowery Theater. This is one of these lower Manhattan, down on the Bowery. It's a huge place, holds 4,000 people. He's great at Othello. Mary, do you have any associations or thoughts about the kind of character that Othello is, Shakespeare's Othello?
You know, I keep trying to crack that nut. I can't get an appointment to be seen for that role. But
keep trying. You're not trying hard enough.
Hashtag not me too. Like, why not me?
Why not me?
Oh, did I just go blue? I went very dark there. I'm taking it to the edge, Andy. No, you know what? Othello is one of the Shakespeare plays I don't know a lot about. I've never really done any even work on it. I know it's a crowd pleaser.
Yeah, it's a good one. But Othello is a man of action. He's very reactive. He's impulsive. Someone tells him his wife is cheating. He believes it. He's a military commander. He's Mr. Take action, do it. Act first, think later. And it's kind of, his so-called tragic flaw. Edwin Forrest, he's a huge hit as Othello. That kind of brings him up in the ranks. He is not as good at Hamlet. Why? Hamlet is a guy who struggles internally. He's like the first neurotic, right? I should do, I shouldn't. Well, what about this? What about that? That doesn't work so well for Ned Forrest. It works very well for William Macready.
Question.
Yes, ma'am.
You may just want to skirt this issue altogether, but you said Macready did Othello? A big hit with Othello?
Forrest. Forrest is good at Othello, but he stumbles as Hamlet. But Macready is great at Hamlet,
So Forrest, did he do it in blackface? Do we know?
That is a great question. I'm sure there is a theater historian out there who knows. I don't know.
I would assume so.
I would assume so because blackface was a...
Like, it would be unusual if he didn't at that time.
I would think so. But it's
P.S.
a great...
Anybody listening to this podcast, everything I say, look it up. Everything Andy says, just accept it as fact. Josh, I'm not so sure about, but,
I do know this is also, not to go on too much of a tangent, it's around the time that blackface minstrelsy begins to be popular. Right. Starts in the North before it becomes popular in the South. But anyway, Forrest considers Macready to be repressed. I don't have any time for that repressed, sissy stuff. And he favors what has been called by a theater historian named Oscar Brockett, who's very well known. Ned Forrest is famous for this physical and heroic style. Now, I want to talk a little about manhood here. And amongst the lower classes, the working classes, the idea of manhood is very much what Ned Forrest is putting across. Heroic, physical, you take what you want. It's Andrew Jackson. But if you're starting to become kind of an upper middle class guy in the world of business, in the world of the professions, in the world of politics, you have to start practicing what's called self-control and impression management, right? It's eventually going to be how to win friends and influence people, right? This is according to historian Richard Butch. So salesmen, I don't know if you know this, salesmen used to be called drummers. And that was because they would literally beat a drum and merchants would come into town. They would follow the drum sound to a big warehouse and then buy stuff and get back on the train and go back to the hinterlands. But salesmen over this period and over the 1800s and early 1900s, they're starting to realize, like, you don't need to drum. What you need to do is form relationships and kind of be friendly and seduce. And let's play golf. Let me take you out for dinner. I get you, buddy. I'm whoever you need me to be.
That's such a radical departure. You know what I mean? Like drumming or actual human relationship.
Yeah.
That's such a vastly different approach.
Yeah. And it has a lot to do with the changing economy where you're not, on the frontier anymore. The frontier is your little office cubicle. Yes, it's a relationship, but it's also one based on manipulation and based on transaction.
Did language play any part in that as well? Like,
what are you thinking?
In other words, did it get to a point where the language differences between, immigrants was less drastic? So I could see, in other words, I could see why drumming, because it's nonverbal, could just be like, everybody come on and buy stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas relationships, it would require, I think, more like people speaking the same tongue.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Totally. You need the cultural capital to mark yourself out as an expert. You can even see, and we're going to get to the way some of the upper 10 were responding to what was happening with the Bowery B'hoys in their language. It marks them out as an authority. They speak in a certain way, and it's still to this day, if you use such and such a word, you're an elite. You're a key-sheeting elite. And if
Right.
By the way, eventually men in America are going to get so good at this kind of nuanced businessman politician approach that Teddy Roosevelt is going to freak out and say we have to get back to the land and practice a strenuous lifestyle. Anyway, Ned Forrest, I love it. He was a bodybuilder, so he was a total actor bro. And he was, to give him his props, he was a real perfectionist. When he played King Lear, he went to hospitals to study people who were suffering from mental illness.
Wow, that's really cool.
It is cool. It is cool. And he comes out with this very kind of RFK Jr. sounding declaration. He says, now I know more than the doctors. Although, to be fair, a lot of people knew more than doctors in 1848.
Right.
He says, I am Lear.
Oh, my God. I was just going to say, too, it's interesting to hear you describe the newer approach of salesmen. It's very feminine.
Yes. Yes.
You know what I mean? It almost sounds like womanly wiles. Like, sure, you could use brute force, but why not make the man think that he's making the choice when you're actually making the choice, but you're making him think that he made it, and blah, blah.
Exactly, exactly. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because the 1800s are a time of what's been called the feminization of American culture. It's really when religion and preachers are starting to be looked at with less respect, because they're not manly enough, they're becoming too womanly. And so that's a huge vein running through all of this.
Wow.
Ned Forrest is going to reach his peak in 1828, and he announces he's going to have a contest. He's going to pay $500 for a 5-act tragedy about what he calls the aboriginals of this country. He said he had lived with a Choctaw community. And again, this is a huge, important piece of this. It's beyond the depth of what we're doing here to go into as much as it requires, but there is a very complicated relationship, just like today, between white people and the indigenous people who were living here when the colonizers landed. The Indians are portrayed as noble and rustic and simple, and they managed to clear the frontier and to live in the frontier. And at the same time, it's so nice of them to get out of the way, because they're basically obstacles. And so they're noble, they're sad, and they're disappearing by a kind of natural process. Those are the words of a historian writing about it.
I remember just recently hearing some famous figure around that period saying that, according to his belief at the time, like, blacks will never catch up.
Mm-hmm.
Native Americans, they're inferior to us, but given enough positive influences, it was Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because he admired their, horticultural skills and like their farming techniques. And so he's like, they're kind of smart, if they just learn how to like dress nice and, And all of that, Mary, is going to be heavily impacted by Darwinism, which is going to be used and misused famously. And bear in mind the idea that the term race at this point in history doesn't really apply. It doesn't really mean the human race. There's no real concept of a human race, and maybe in a very abstract term. But race really means something between what we today would call ethnicity and species. So the black man, it's a different race. It's almost like a different species. Same is true of the indigenous person. Like Neanderthals versus like Cro-Magnon man or...
Yeah, something about that. And they're all playing out their kind of quote unquote natural destiny.
Right.
And so thank you for showing us, I want to cosplay the indigenous person, but please do your part and get killed in the Indian Wars, which are starting around now, and it'll end in 1890 with the Battle of Wounded Knee. This is around the time of James Fenimore Cooper's The Last of the Mohicans. So Ned Forrest loves this role in Metamora. He is good at this sort of quote-unquote little guy fighting back against the system. He is famous for playing Spartacus in a play called The Gladiator. And in case you're wondering, were these Roman slaves meant to be equated with the enslaved black persons in the American South? The answer is no. Again, there's taking on all of these kind of exotic roles, but it always comes back to this kind of, I don't know, constructed meaning of what American is, America. You're against aristocracy. You hate the English. You hate the nobility. He's very much a figure after Andrew Jackson. So in 1834, Ned Forrest decides he is going to strike across the Atlantic and make his first tour of the UK, and he calls it his counterattack. Because he's going to show that he, who is now calling himself or being called the native tragedian, which he's of course not a native person, or sometimes the American tragedian, that he's just as gosh darn good as all these British Shakespearean actors. And he does okay. His first tour goes okay. But it's around now that he starts to develop this kind of conspiracy theory that Macready and Macready's manager are conspiring to ruin his career, and that Macready hates the U.S. It was rumored that Macready, while on a tour of the U.S., they needed an arrow to use as a prop on stage, and they didn't have one. And they asked Macready, could you give us one of your personal hunting arrows? Because apparently people traveled with their personal hunting arrows. And Macready says, I'll give it to you, but I want you to know I can't get an arrow such as this in your country, sir. So there's an insult to American arrow making as being not...
Dude, that's low.
That is low, yeah.
Don't insult my quiver.
This is also a period, the 1820s, 30s, 40s, where there's a lot of Europeans and Brits are coming to America and sort of writing their observations, which are usually not terribly flattering. Frances Trollope, who I think has a hilarious name, particularly when it came to the theater. She went to a theater in Cincinnati in 1830, and she was revolted by the fact that the spitting was incessant and there was a mixed smell of onions and whiskey, which is interesting, too, because I think that's how the theaters of Shakespeare's day, that's probably how they were. So everything you hate is something you used to be, you know. So.
Right.
Now, Macready tours the U.S. in 1844. He comes across the Atlantic, and he is, by this point, hated by the Bowery B'hoys, who hate him and associate him with what Robert Snyder calls New York City's Anglophile economic elite. Although outwardly, Macready and Forrest are still kind of getting along. Then things take a turn in 1845, because Forrest goes back to Britain to make a tour, and it is not a success. I think
this is separate from the counterattack tour?
Yeah, this is separate. The counterattack tour was 1834. He's going back now 11 years later for Counterattack 2, Britain, 1845. I think they must have had some good merch. This does not go as well as the 1834 tour, and he is feeling it. Forrest is feeling it. And while he's there, he goes to see William Macready playing Hamlet in Edinburgh. And while he's watching Macready on stage, Ned Forrest hisses him very loudly.
No, he didn't.
He totally did. He hissed. Why did he hiss? What did he hiss at? Apparently at one point, Macready did something that Forrest described as a fancy dance. He did a fancy dance, and I was hissing because it was a salutary and wholesome corrective to the abuses of the stage. And besides, says Forrest, everybody was hissing. Apparently, Ned Forrest had been hissed in London, so a little bit of a sensitive feller, you know, some fragile male ego feelings.
Mm-hmm.
So things are now officially there's open warfare, at least from Forrest towards Macready. I think Macready is thinking, like, what does this guy have have up his butt about me? Forrest tries to get some work in Paris. He doesn't get it. And now he's convinced it is the malign influence of Macready that is keeping him down. But I think truly it's that he does what he does well. It just has limits. There's a certain group of people in New York and also here in Europe who they're not wanting it. They're not liking it. It's like you're a super action star and then you try to do your I don't know, sensitive comedy, it doesn't go over so well. And he can never fully take credit for that. He's got this very wounded male ego. Let's talk about the Astor Opera House, which is the scene of the crime, as it were. It was built in 1847, and it was the pride of the Upper Ten in New York. It was described as one of the most conspicuous and magnificent edifices. It featured a lot of Italian opera, which was attended by the most wealthy and the most fashionable people. By the way, Italian opera is kind of the kale salad, bespoke farm-to-table, prebiotic. It's like if you're living your best life, you're seeing some Italian opera.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who go to see it at the Opera House, they are often called, and they often are, the same people. They pay to rent out the pews for an entire year for their family at places like Grace Church. Do you remember Grace Church, Mary?
I do. I had a baccalaureate service there.
Yes, yes.
That is where I received the Stella Adler Conservatory Award for Outstanding Achievement in Acting.
Oh, was Stella Adler still alive at the time?
No, at the time she was still alive.
She was. Did she
give
it
died,
to you?
No.
Okay.
But she died, I think, just a few years after I graduated college.
I didn't know that. Congratulations. A little
thank you.
After the fact, but that's wonderful. Not surprising. But yeah, so the people who are going to see these Italian operas are sometimes renting out the pews, which I still think is a funny word, at the Grace Church for their family, so their whole family can show up in their finery on Sunday, and they're paying $1,400 a year, which is, I looked into it, $1,400 at the time could have bought 25,000 pounds of flour.
Wow.
So what we spend on. Meanwhile, where do the Bowery Boys go? They go to the Bowery Theater and the Chatham, and they love these action-packed melodramas. And according to one person who was describing them at the time, they go there clad in their red shirts with their pockets full of peanuts and pigtail. And Ned Forrest is their pet. And they sit on these long benches in an area of the theater that's called the Pit, which was also the name in Shakespeare's time, I think, where the groundlings sat. It's called the Pit. They're talking, they're drinking, they're smoking, they're crunching on peanuts, they're shouting at the actors, they're ignoring the actors, they're totally making arrangements with sex workers. Washington Irving, who wrote The Legend of Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle, who's very much one of the Upper Ten. He's one of the people who's a huge Macready supporter, and we'll see he's going to play an important role in all this. He goes to one of these theaters, and he calls the Pit Noah's Ark because it is filled with so many animals. They're playing cards, they're chatting, they're hooting, they're cursing, they're smoking. And he says, they even strive to appear inattentive. I just want to say audience behavior is so much a part of what is being curated and controlled in different class environments at the time. If you're an upper middle class person, an upper class person, you're quiet and you listen. You don't throw stuff. You don't chew on your pigtails. That's for afterwards. And so at the Astor Opera House, instead of a pit, they have this very French-sounding term, which they call the parquet. And there are no galleries. The galleries are renamed the amphitheater. So it sounds like something out of ancient Greece. And, as you might know, Mary, variety theater, when it's later sort of made available for middle-class men and women, variety is renamed as vaudeville because it sounds fancy in French.
It's like renaming Hell's Kitchen Clinton Hill.
Exactly. When you notice that, I'm here in, Elysian Heights.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you mean what we used to call,
shit stain?
Exactly. Dead Chickenville? Anyway, the Bowery Boys hate it. They call the Astor Opera House the British Opera House, even though it was inspired by the San Carlo Opera House in Naples. And apparently there was a singer named Beneventano who was I think he was like the Andrea Bocelli of the age. He was very popular at the Astor Opera House. A recent scholar has described these Italian operas as, quote, the apotheosis of mediocrity. And I think that they were just that. So
that sounds like a Gilbert and Sullivan lyric. The apotheosis of the mediocrity.
Exactly. Yes. So by this point, Ned Forrest is in a total dither. He hates Macready. He thinks Macready is responsible for everything that's going wrong with his life. And he starts doing what he calls Hamlet for Hamlet, which is playing the same role in the same city on the same nights. So he does Hamlet in Philadelphia, and as we're going to see, he does a Macbeth at the same time that Macready will come to do his ill-fated Macbeth at the Astor Opera House. But that takes a lot of planning, and I'm sure, I wonder if his handlers were like, Ned, are you sure you want to do Richard III in Columbus, Ohio? Yes. It just seems like a lot of work. No, we're doing it.
It's not a good look, Ned. You seem a little obsessed.
And it is very adolescent, isn't it? Like, God damn it, notice me.
Right.
I just happen to be doing Hamlet here.
Yeah.
Macready, he's touring the U.S. He has a lot of popularity, but he's also starting to get a lot of heckling. He tours New Orleans, Richmond, Baltimore. Sometimes people throw things at him, pennies and rotten eggs. And according to one story, he's playing out west and somebody threw an entire sheep carcass on stage. And I don't know how you recover from that, but he did. I think William Macready is deciding it is time for a farewell America tour. I don't know how many more sheep carcasses I can tolerate.
I'm going to the wrong theaters.
Yeah.
Like the concession stand, it's like the same old jujubes. Really? How about some sheep carcass?
I'd like to purchase a sheep carcass. You're not going to throw it on stage, are you? No, I'm just hungry.
No, I'm just, man, I'm just like fucking.
Who doesn't want a sheep carcass? Whatever, okay. You know what? If you have a deer carcass, that'll be fine too. Macready goes on his farewell U.S. tour in 1848, 1849, and Forrest is full on the offensive. When Macready plays in Hartford, Connecticut in the fall of 1848, Ned Forrest writes a very scathing op-ed, and he says, Macready is refusing to show himself for less than $1 a ticket. And as a result, he's playing to empty boxes. And he is ignorant of the great institutions of this country. And I think there's so much there that also we see today. First of all, $1 a ticket was not that unusual for the time for a production like that. He's saying, and you can see Trump saying this, which is, you're doing a horrible performance and nobody's watching you.
Right. Regardless of the actual numbers.
Exactly. Like, yeah, you're terrible and no one's watching you.
People are saying, I've been hearing it. A lot of people are saying it. Really?
And they're angry at Macready because he's not playing by the rules as they set them down. And again, this is this wounded adolescent thing that I keep coming back to. It is desperately needing other people to recognize and validate your wound, which a good parent has to do. They have to manage. That's why it's so hard to raise teenagers. Not that I've ever done it. You have to get that their anger, it's like, I hate you, but please don't leave me. And I think without that kind of mirroring, one can grow up into a horrible political figure or a horrible male figure where you're blaming and projecting all of that abandonment wound onto somebody else or something else. And Sarah Ahmed wrote a book called The Cultural Politics of Emotion, and I think she hits it perfectly when she points to this kind of hatred as a form of intimacy. It's a craving to be seen that makes itself known as hatred.
It almost reminds me of like, hell knoweth no fury like a woman scorned, or whatever the quote is. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned.
Yeah.
Like Ned seems like a woman scorned.
Oh, Yes. Oh, and by the way, let's put a pin in that because we're going to get there.
Yeah.
Even more. But absolutely. Yeah. And there's all this projection onto Macready.
Yeah. Petulant. Petulant. Like.
Yeah. And sorry, you got me thinking that more and more attacks in the press, against Macready in certain newspapers. And he's portrayed in a very feminine coded way in terms of his costumes where he wears feathers and lace. And he's described as a person who has little sympathy with the masses. He's an intellectual actor, a gentleman of the most fastidious taste, who never plays to the applause of the unthinking. There is a frigidity and coldness about him which repels rather than courts sympathy. And
wow.
Forrest, he says, all right, Macready, you're coming here to do your tour. Well, We pity that you know nothing about America, and we hope for his own credit's sake he will not, when he gets home, write a little black book about American manners a la Trollope and others. And again, this is the time Francis Trollope, Alexis de Tocqueville, Charles Dickens are writing their sort of witticisms about America. And again, it's that we don't care what you think, but we hate what you think, you know?
It's like if Taylor Swift and Beyonce were both touring at the same time, and like wherever Beyonce went, Taylor was like, I'm doing a show too.
Yes,
right
exactly.
down the block, and it's 5 cents cheaper. She's not even that good. Like,
exactly. And again, we were just saying, it's this, we don't care about what you think, but you better not say it. And it's this strong sense of, and I think this is really, I associate this with a lot of reactionary politics, which is this intense abandonment pain around letting somebody else have a separate mind. And I want to just end for now by talking about Ned Forrest's personal life. And that's why I was referring to that earlier, Mary. Things are not going well for Ned. He had gotten married to a, wait for it, English woman named Catherine Sinclair. Catherine Sinclair, for reasons I don't know, had the nickname Consuelo. Not Consuela.
Wasn't she Churchill's mother or something?
Oh, you know what? You may be right. I don't know, but it's entirely possible that there's a link between Catherine Sinclair. Yeah, I should be.
I just remember the Consuelo part. I may be conflating facts, but I remember reading about Consuelo and thinking how odd that was. Yeah,
there may be. Yeah, it's just fascinating, these strands of history. Anyway, Forrest is on tour. He's in Cincinnati. It's May 1948. He comes into his hotel room only to discover what a journalist at the time described as his wife, quote, standing between the knees of a Mr. George Jameson, who was sitting upon the sofa with his hands upon her person. So,
wow.
Forrest busts in. He's like, what the hell is going on? She kind of shifts and kind of gets out. Whoa. And she says what everybody would say at that time in history, which is, he was just giving me a phrenology exam. Mary, you're familiar with phrenology?
Is that like the study of the... No, I'm thinking of something else.
No, I think you were... It is the
like
study...
the shape of the skull?
Exactly. It is the...
Okay.
It was a very serious science that if you could examine the shape and slope of the skull and its size, you could understand human nature. And it also believed that the parts of the head were divided into various emotional zones. And so if you're in a pinch and it's the mid 1800s and you need an excuse, phrenology, something related to phrenology. I'm sure this made Ned Forrest feel not so great about his manhood, particularly because it seemed that Consuelo enjoyed the company of many men and perhaps even a few women. There were rumors that Consuelo had secretly sided with Macready. So Forrest and his wife, Consuelo, Catherine Sinclair, they fall out. It's a very bitter divorce, and it's played out in all the papers. And over the course of this, Ned Forrest, because he's so bitter and so resentful, his best friend, Nathaniel Willis, who was the editor of the Home Journal, it was a very popular magazine, starts to side with his wife. It's his ex-wife. So there's a lot of abandonment trauma here. And basically what starts to happen is after every show he gives, Ned Forrest comes out in front of the curtain and delivers what Luc Sant, in the book Low Life, it's one of my favorite books, he calls a lengthy diatribe against wife and friend. So the show is over. Forrest comes out. People just want to get out of there. Let me tell you about Catherine Sinclair, my cheating wife, and Nathaniel Willis, that no-good, dastardly former best friend of mine, who says I'm being a paranoid idiot. So now it's coming down to that second week of May in 1849, and Macready is going to do a run of Macbeth. It'll be his farewell, his swan song at the Astor Place Opera House, and Ned Forrest decides he's going to do his own Macbeth further downtown at the Broadway Theater. Some sources say it was the Bowery Theater. And there's a line in Macbeth, which Ned Forrest, when he's playing Macbeth, this competitive Macbeth, he says the line, "What's the rhubarb, senna, or what purgative drug would scour these English hence?" In other words, in the play, English, get out of Scotland. In New York, English, get out of Manhattan.
Right.
So that's where we're going to leave it for now.
Ooh, nice cliffhanger.
Yeah. On our next episode, you will hear how tensions between Ned Forrest and William Macready, they're going to simmer to a boil and then boil over. You'll also find out a little more about New York's wealthy elite, sometimes called the codfish aristocracy. And you will get to hear about a very foul-smelling substance called asafoetida. So tune in. Thanks for listening, everyone, and take care.
There's more to history than what you've been taught. History repeats, it may or may not. Time's got baggage, we all do. Erdman's here to walk us through what, when, where, how, who. Feel familiar? Crack the spine, a time's old script. We're diving in where the facts have slipped. It's history told with wit and care, with ghosts and guests, no thoughts to spare. Who, what, why, how, where. Feel familiar?